Welcome to This Week in Missouri Politics. Today we are joined by the Senator from Tax Cuts, Senator Bill Eigel, running for governor from St. Charles County. Welcome back to the show.
Scott, thanks for having me.
You're almost becoming like the Alec Baldwin. We've done this so many times now. We should get you like a jacket, like a six-timer or something like that. So, top question. I put out on Twitter, hey, what do you want to hear from Bill Eigel? And of course I had folks say, why is he so terrible or why is he so great? Then I had folks say, he's running for governor. Is he running for governor, wink, wink, or is he running for governor? So I'm just going to ask you. Are you going to file at the Kirkpatrick building for governor and be on the ballot for the governor of the state of Missouri next August?
Yeah, you know, Scott, I've given this a lot of thoughts, and through much prayer and talking to family and talking to my supporters, I'm ready to announce on your show today that I'm not running for lieutenant governor.
You're ruling it out.
I'm ruling out lieutenant governor. No, listen, we make light of that, but listen, there's only one position in the state that I think can change the trajectory of this state to take its place amongst the leaders in this country, the Floridas, the Texas, those states that are growing. And there's one position in particular that's really empowered to be that voice of the people, to bring what I describe as really the reckoning for the swamp of Jefferson City, and also to provide the solutions that are going to make this state strong economically, and that's the position of governor. Everything I've done for the past 8 months has been geared towards building a coalition that's going to be putting together a successful run for the position of governor in 2024.
So let's just work it through. Treasurer, you got a guy that you know pretty well running for treasurer. I assume you probably have some hankering who you might vote for state treasurer.
I'm a big Andrew Koenig fan, always have been, and probably always will be.
Secretary of State's open. You got a buddy running for that. Denny Hoskins. I figure you kind of know who you're going to vote for there. Lieutenant governor does not have somebody that just jumps out right away and says, oh, he's obviously going to vote for her. You're saying you're not running for lieutenant governor. So if somebody's sitting on the sidelines right now thinking, you know, I was going to support Bill Eigel. I like his message. But I'm going to wait till he's announced what he's really running for. He's really running for governor.
That's right. Well, and again, anybody that's been following me closely, I think, is probably already in on this decision and has known this has been coming. But for me, there is. I've been traveling the state, Scott. You know this. We have put 35,000 miles on my truck now, driving all over the state. And as I go from urban areas, rural areas, suburban areas, Republicans are frustrated. They're upset. I ask them how they think we're doing down in Jefferson City, and I get negative feedback. They feel like we're falling behind. They're pointing to other states that are doing the big red things that we're not doing. And they are ready for someone that's really going to be willing to go down there to Jefferson City and kick over what has become a status quo that is no longer, it's not prospering our state, it's stagnating our state. And they see even the other candidates that have signaled that they're going to run for governor, they see them as an extension of that status quo, and they're convinced that those individuals aren't going to do what's necessary to get us growing again. So when we talk about where we want to get to as a state here in the great state of Missouri, well, I'm talking about doing those big red states. Look at the state of Texas. A couple weeks ago, passes the largest property tax cut in the history of the state, maybe the history of America. Well, I know folks over in Jackson County and Kansas City that are being devastated by high property taxes, and you don't have to sell anybody on the fact that personal property tax rates are way too high in the state. So folks are wanting to know who's going to be that leader, who's going to be that warrior conservative that's going to come in here and implement these big policy ideas that we've been lacking and we only hear about every 2 years in campaign season. We're in a war of ideas in this state. I think we need a wartime governor.
I think it'd be, folks have asked me, you know, people play fantasy, draft politics. It's like, well, Bill Eigel owned a business. I've seen him be frustrated with the state senate. As a state senator, I can't imagine him sitting up in the front of the dais for 10 hours a day without any real power. It just seems like it wouldn't be that enjoyable for you to come down to Jeff City to do.
well, and I think this goes back to, you know, there's really one position, there's one executive position that has an enormous amount of influence on the state budget where we're dedicating our resources. And when we allow we have allowed, unfortunately in this state, really a center-left coalition to manage the finances of this state, which has allowed government to get bigger than it's ever been before, which has allowed the tax burden to be heavier than it's ever been before. And what that's translated to is Missouri's not growing. And we're turning our TVs on at night and we're looking at other big red states like Florida or Texas.
You cut taxes quite a bit. I mean, the budget's bigger because of the federal, I mean, you're a businessman. You've seen, I mean, the books are the books because the federal government has came in and said, here's money. If you don't spend it, it goes to California, Illinois. But you've cut taxes, right?
I think that ultimately the amount of taxes we've actually cut is really just lip service to the amount of spending growth that we've seen.
How much do you have to cut taxes to see Missouri grow?
I think you got to get rid of personal property tax.
Totally?
Yeah, entirely. Every person, anywhere in the state. I just don't think that you should have to pay rent to the government every December 1st for the crime of owning a car. You got to get rid of that. That's something that Tennessee doesn't.
And say, there you go. You get rid of that income. It's your business. What do you get rid of that you're buying? What do you just close schools? What do you do?
No, all of those, of all the problems I'm worried about in the state, none of them have to do with government not having enough of our cash right now. In fact, every one of those schools, every one of those fire departments, every one of those local government entities, adjusted for inflation, has never had more of our taxpayer money than they have right now.
A lot of folks say that. A lot of your W-2 Republicans will say that. I've really met a lot of W-2 Republicans that know a lot about creating jobs, just never created one. You have. You know that if you cut what you bring in, at some point you have to cut what you buy.
Well, yes, but we have so much money in government right now. Think about it. The state budget in the state of Missouri has gone from, in 2010, it was $20 billion, to today it's over $51 billion. And you're right, on one hand, some of that is federal growth, and by the way, that's a big problem too.
That'll go away.
But it's also general revenue growth. In fact, let me put it in perspective for you. Just the general revenue growth that we saw last fiscal year was more than $2 billion. That's more than the value of every single personal property tax bill for every citizen in every county of the state. So instead of eliminating personal property tax, what did we do? Well, we just grew spending. And now look at the things we're spending money on today. We're buying tens of millions of dollars for professional sports teams in Kansas City and around the state. We just paid for Governor Parson.
The Cardinals, I agree with you.
Governor Parson was just at a ceremony earlier this week celebrating a $200 million concrete park that was going to be built over the top of I-70. That's what we're spending our money on. And when we're doing those things, when we're wasting that money, we're not lowering the tax burden. And when we're not lowering the tax burden and creating the economic environment that's going to cause people to want to move here and invest in the state of Missouri, well, then we fall behind and then we stagnate. And that's what we've seen happen.
Let's talk about how you get that pencil. You run against Jay Ashcroft. I mean, that is, when you start talking about legendary names in this state, you don't get to your second hand without name Ashcroft. How do you beat that guy?
Well, I tell you, that there's a real false narrative that name ID is sufficient in order to win the governor's mansion. I think if you go back to 2016, you ask Pete Kinder that question, he would tell you that name ID is really not as exciting as it's made out to be. In fact, if you go back to 2016, Pete Kinder had a bigger lead because of that name ID over Eric Reitens than any lead that Jay Ashcroft's got today. So I think that the folks in this state, when it comes to the governor's position, in particular, they don't want to just know what your last name is because they're not going to pick the leader of the state based on somebody's last name. They want to know what you're going to do for the state. And when I'm out there talking about these issues that make a difference to Missourians, that's what they're responding to. And I know because I've driven 30,000 miles on my truck and I've heard it from them directly.
I always love people kind of know what they think they know what sheriff, mayor, and governor does. Whether they do or not, those are the three jobs they kind of think they know sort of what that does. And I think it strikes them a little bit closer to home of who the sheriff is, who your mayor is, and who your governor is. Let me talk about, so there was a story. You've been, I mean, Christine Page hasn't carried as much water as you've carried for Missouri Right to Life. I saw the heartbeat bill. You came out, no exceptions, right?
That's correct.
Governor Kehoe came out with he would consider them. I think Jay Ashcroft doesn't. How do you come down on that? And were you a little disappointed about MRL not endorsing you?
So we'll take these one at a time. Let's talk about Lieutenant Governor Kehoe. We talk about who's going to win the governor's race. I don't think that anybody that is moving to the left on these core issues of the Republican platform is going to be successful in a Republican primary. It's not about whether or not you can find the fact that there may or may not be some Republicans that somewhat agree with you on this issue, but if you find yourself as a candidate for governor in the state moving to the more moderate, the more liberal position on protecting life, and let's not forget, every life is precious. I think that's a bad signal as it relates to Mike Kehoe. And by the way, Mike Kehoe has already taken a lot of flack because a lot of his policy positions are out of line with the Republican platform.
Do you think that's the rape and incest exceptions are in line where most Missourians are?
I think that all life is precious, and I think that
you've driven around the state.
I've driven around the state.
If I had to personally guess, most Missourians are pro-life, but maybe not quite to that extent.
I can tell you, of the thousands of Missouri Republicans that I've met over the past 8 months, not a single one of them has told me they're looking for a governor that's going to turn the heartbeat bill that we passed a couple of years ago into Swiss cheese by adding more exceptions to it. I haven't found not a single one.
If you put 30,000 miles on the truck, you've driven away from the city to some good parts of the state.
Absolutely.
So break this down for me. You're from St. Charles. How do you go when you said West Plains? or you said at Willow Spring. How do you go tell Wendell Bailey and convince him to vote for you?
Well, because the things that are good for rural Missouri are the same things that are good for suburban and urban Missouri. And that is the policies that are going to alleviate the tax burden, the policies that are going to protect our farmland. You know, one of the biggest conversations we've had in the legislative session that we just finished up was protecting our farmland from foreign entities that want to come in, try to buy up the land, drive up the price of our ground, and drive out other Missouri farmers. And it's not just China. It's the World Economic Forum that wants to come in here, take our land and control our food supply. And every day farmers are actually worried about that issue, and they're looking for folks that are actually going to defend them from that. I'm the only guy amongst the three candidates that has said, hey, I don't think that not only do I don't think China should be buying our land, I don't think any foreign entity should be buying our land and driving our farmers out. So protecting our land, that's going to make us successful.
What do you tell to one of your constituents now working at Bayer? They work for a company who owns land here in Missouri. If they can't own land, well, how do they go to work?
Well, I want to implement policies that are going to bring growth to the state that benefits more than just one particular company. So when I talk about getting rid of the income tax, when I talk about getting rid of personal property tax, that's going to generate population growth that's going to come to the state of Missouri that is far more powerful and far more long lasting than the benefits to any one particular company. In fact, I would make the argument that we have had way too much special interest status quo being driven by a few powerful corporate special interests in Jefferson City that don't really care about what's good for the broader part of the state, but care about what's good for them. So I'm interested in enacting policies that are going to put Missouri on par with all those other big red states. They're going to put them on par with the Floridas, the Texas, the Tennessees, and to do that, we've got to get rid of personal property tax. To do that, we got to get rid of income tax. And to do those things, we've got to get this budget under control. We cannot continue to spend like Democrats and then pretend that we're actually Republicans when it comes to campaign season.
I want to have you back on before session and talk about next session. Let's talk about veto session. The governor had some line item vetoes. There's a new Senate Appropriations Chairman, so he will be the one that will bring those up or not. Something tells me that if they don't override some St. Charles line item vetoes, nobody gets their individual line items overridden. Would I be right to assume that?
Well, we'll see about that. You know, Scott, when I talk about this budget, I refer to it as the ultimate victory of the swamp over the people. You know, Mike Parson wants to spend $51 billion. $51 billion. He's never spent more money. And even though he had time for everything from a dinosaur museum for kids in Jefferson County to a concrete overpass in Kansas City to a parking lot for a professional women's sports team in Kansas City, he couldn't find time for clean drinking water in St. Charles. He couldn't find time to give pay raises to the highway patrol in this state. Couldn't find time for a police academy in St. Charles. Couldn't find time to protect the people over in Cass County from a landfill that they didn't want to have. So I don't have any confidence or faith that the fiscal finances of the state are going in a direction that we promised in campaign season. And I think that Mike Parson and the budget chairman, Lincoln Huff, have not only betrayed every single Republican in this state, they have betrayed really the trajectory
more
of the state.
spending for your district, or you want to cut all of it?
I want to cut all spending. But even when we're cutting spending, there's still room to do the things that are actually important to the actual people of the state. So the $5 million that we talk about to get clean drinking water in St. Charles County, we've got the resources to be able to do that because it's a priority of the people, not just some special interest giveaway, which is primarily what this budget is made of. In fact, this budget had more than $10 billion of new decision items, new pork, new wasteful spending. I refer to this budget as making earmarks great again. That is the legacy that Lincoln Huff and Mike Parson have put us on. That's what we're going to be talking about next year, and I think Republicans are looking for something different.
I look forward to watching and sitting up in the gallery when you guys go to the budget next month. Thank you so much for joining us, Senator.
Thanks, Scott.
We'll be right back with our opinion maker panel. Representative David Casteel joins us for the first time after this.
For more than a century, the St. Louis Carpenters Union has shaped our communities. Through trusted alliances, we deliver skilled professional craftspeople while our business partners provide the kind of quality jobs that keep our economy humming. It's a blueprint that has worked since 1882. Turning Missouri into a right-to-work state stalls progress, wipes out jobs, and kills momentum. Right to work is wrong for everyone. Let's keep Missouri moving forward. Visit carpdc.org to learn more.
Thanks for joining us. Justice and Journalism with Judge Mike Carter. What I like to do is bring facts and circumstances from around the metro area with some local politicos, charitable causes, and let you decide for yourself if you like what's going on.
I'm in this for public service.
400 qualified jurors in some of the rural counties are actually really hard to find.
When you're talking about low-level nonviolent offenders,
when you put them in jail, you increase the likelihood that they turn into a serious offender.
Justice in Journalism with me, Judge Mike Carter.
Starting with just $300 to his name, Vivek Malik has never stopped working and has risen to become Missouri's state treasurer. Vivek Malik never forgets our duty to keep the American dream alive.
This is the greatest country in the world. There's a lot that divides us, but the one thing that unites us all is our love for this great country.
Vivek Malik, treasuring what we hold most dear.
Data captured by our state-of-the-art monitors helps us pinpoint the timing and location of severe weather more accurately and respond to trouble more quickly. Ameren, Missouri's investment in smart technologies like this is one way we're improving reliability and restoring power faster than ever. Responding to trouble before trouble hits. That's energy at work. Ameren, Missouri.
Welcome back to Week in Missouri Politics Opinion Maker Panel Time. Ray Hartman, founder of the Riverfront Times. Thank you so much for joining the show.
Thanks for having me.
Representative Chantelle Nickson-Clark, thank you so much. First time on the show?
Yes, and thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. Representative David Casteel from Jeffco, welcome back. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you very much.
And the Dean of the Missouri Republican Party, David Barklage, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, sir.
You're working with the Kehoe campaign. Tell me where the race is.
I think the race is, still far from over, obviously. Jay Ashcroft has an advantage because of name ID from his father. But I have to say this, Mike Kehoe is the guy that gets up before anybody else has ridden a horse, sold 3 cars, and probably attended 2 ham breakfasts before either one of his opponents get off. In a governor's race, one of the key things is the element of having a candidate who will network and do the hard work, and he does that every day. The polling shows that among decided voters, there's only a 5-point differential in a 3-way race between Kehoe and Ashcroft, and I think that's going to be the key. It is not about John Ashcroft's name ID coming to Jay. It's going to be about who the characters are.
Boy, I tell you what, Nick Ragone, we had some guys on a couple weeks ago talking about all 3 campaigns. He was great. But let me ask you the thing that probably shapes race more than anything else. Bill Eigel came on, said he is not running for lieutenant governor. He is not running for secretary of state, treasurer. He's running for governor. Will he run for governor?
I think he will. I think he's committed to it. I think he brings a good perspective. I think that Bill Eigel has served well in the Senate, and some people may have different opinions on him, but he articulates.
Terrific campaign.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think he's the best orator in the party right now. I mean, he's
the more good people running for governor, the better. And to that regard, it gives people better choice. And I have faith in my candidate or in the candidate I support. But for that regard, I think that the more the merrier.
David Casteel, we came, at one time they said the bellwether county of Missouri, not so much anymore, it's the right-wing county of Missouri. Who's going to carry Jeffco?
Well, I think that we've got good candidates to choose from. I think either way, Missouri's going to be fine. Mike Kehoe is an example of the American dream. He was raised by a single mother. He's a business owner, self-made man. Jay Ashcroft, as was said, has the name recognition and name ID. So either way, I think we're going to have a Republican governor, and I think that the Missouri citizens will be in good hands moving forward.
Ray Hartman, an issue that you know a lot about. I think with the 48th anniversary of you working for Kit Bond, the last time you had the pro-choice Republican and the pro-life Democrat running against each other for governor. If I was Bill Eigel, I'd have been pretty disappointed about Missouri Right to Life. I mean, he has carried water for them. There's been no difference between his position and theirs. And then however you slice it up, it's a little easier to be Secretary of State and not be in the heat of those fights. Mm-hmm. And they went with him, Secretary of State, early. Right. It'd be disappointing, right?
Sure. Nobody ever got wealthy betting against Mr. David Barklage in Missouri. And I hesitate to say this because, I'm going to owe you an apology because I think there's only one of those 3 candidates who I would agree with your assessment is a good candidate or has good service, and that's Mike Kehoe. And I know that's probably very damaging to him to say that. I think he is. I do think it is far too early. When I went to work for Kit, I believe we were 30 or 35 points ahead of Joe Teasdale in the polls that year.
He just walked right up on you, didn't he?
Well, and I was 13th on a staff at 12, so I wasn't on the political side at all. But and Kit was a wonderful man and a great governor. But I think that Crystal Quaid on the Democratic side has a much better chance than people think to win, and I think a lot of it's going to depend. In fact, almost all of it's going to depend on who's on the top of the ticket. It's my guess, and this is a guess. Nobody knows. That's the key thing we don't know, is that neither neither President Biden nor Donald Trump's going to be the candidates, and that's a bold prediction that, of course, means nothing. But that's a gut feel, and because of that, I think it's very difficult. I know there's this sort of assumption this is a Republican state. As recently as 2012, which is not exactly ancient history, the only statewide Republican who won was Peter Kinder. I mean, that's 12 years ago. That's not, 48 years ago. And so, Donald Trump is a phenomenon. But if he's either, depending on if he's convicted or if he's not on the ticket, I think it changes everything. And that's my view. But I think the.
Well, Representative, tell us about Crystal Quade. You actually work with her.
Sure, absolutely. I hear all the comments that are being made, but I do believe that Crystal has a fight in this race. Women are leading, women are winning, and Crystal is a very progressive leader. She does a phenomenal job inside of the House of Representatives, and she has what it takes to win this race.
Very talented politician.
And what we are finding out is that we have to start putting our names on a ticket.
Yes.
Some of these campaigns are being ran unopposed, and so putting the name on a ticket is enough for me.
Can I say, I want to say one thing, but I also want to say absolutely, because democracy flourishes when you have competitive elections. Sure. And so to that regard, I welcome her in the race.
But Dave, you watched the state change. You were right there in the heat of the battle. It's almost like if you try to tell somebody at the Capitol Day, these Democrats used to run this, they're like, whatever.
The best days of the state when we had so many competitive elections, and I always was for getting a Republican legislature only to end 54 years of Democrat rule, but hoping that it would be competitive after that, because that's the best thing. But let me say about Right to Life, going back to history. When we were trying to get the majority, Right to Life, I went to them because they kept endorsing Democrats who voted for pro-choice speakers, which was, I would argue, the most critical vote. And they said, well, David, if we don't do that, we won't endorse any Democrats. And I said, well, what are you about, endorsing Democrats or pro-life? My point is they lost their way a long time ago. Peter Kinder, who fought for the partial birth override, who fought hard, couldn't get their endorsement because they claims he had a sign in his yard for pro-stem cell, which it wasn't his yard, it was in his neighbor's. But that's how petty, how political, how lost they are, and I agree with Bill Eigel and Mike Kehoe that they should be the ones endorsed.
Give me a name here. If Ray's right, it's not Trump and Biden, who will it be?
I think that on the Republican side, DeSantis looks a lot like John McCain. He's out there early. He's getting pummeled by everybody. He goes down, but he has national abilities in terms of fundraising.
Is it DeSantis? Give me who.
I think it's DeSantis.
Who's going to be if it's not Trump?
If it's not Trump, it's probably going to be DeSantis, obviously.
If it's not Biden, who's going to be?
The jury's still out.
If it's not Biden, who is it?
Well, my choice right now would be Gretchen Whitmer, or perhaps Gavin Newsom. J.B. Pritzker is a good governor, in my opinion. I know we're on the other side. I know. There you go. No, but I don't think he could win the presidency. I think Gavin Newsom or Gretchen. My choice would be Gretchen Whitmer. And on the Republican side, I think you got a guy, DeSantis, just talked about slitting federal bureaucrats' throats yesterday. I don't think he's anywhere near up to prime time. And so I think it's an open question. I think Tim Scott has a lane, maybe.
If the Republicans are more thirsty to win, I think Nikki Haley could be competitive. I don't think they're quite thirsty enough to win yet.
She would be somebody, I think, if I get to real briefly, don't underestimate the impact of abortion rights in this issue, reproductive freedom. I happen to be very pro-choice, unapologetically, but there's a lot of women. This is the first general election since Roe v. Wade was eliminated by the Supreme Court, and I think you underestimate the power of women voters at your peril.
I want to pick your brain on that next, but first, if we're at the Crystal Tavern right now, Donald Trump's popular there, right? He does pretty well. I think folks get tired of him because it's just so much crazy and on and on. But when you just arrest him every other week for something, I'm just like, I get tired of Trump's goofiness. But at some point, I'm like, these folks are as goofy as Trump.
It's starting to look like they're targeting their opponents. Honestly, it does. doesn't look any other way.
David Barklage, they could have charged Hillary Clinton if they wanted to charge her for the email thing. Now, whether they convict her, could have charged her. Somebody in the Trump administration said, you know what, guys, bad for the country. We're not going to do that. Nobody in the Biden administration seems to give a damn.
Yeah, look, I think American history, you can find almost every president made decisions that could have been impeachable. To that regard, though, I have to take some pause, and it's probably not very popular to do it, that I care very much about voter integrity. And to that regard, some of the allegations on Trump are concerning. Whether they rise to the indictment, I don't know yet because I haven't studied it. But those are a little disconcerting. And I do think in the end that Donald is going to become too consumed with that and not be able to see out of his narrow view to actually talk about a vision for America. It's going to be about Donald Trump, which we're seeing.
Which I think it always says. I kind of get to the point where with Trump, I start to roll my eyes because just always, you're always coming in an election, you lost, you say you lose. But when you just arrest the guy all the time, I start to be like, now wait a minute here, that's not right.
Like, what are we doing?
Yes.
What is the message that we're trying to portray? How many presidents have you known been indicted more than 3 times? This is getting outrageous. What are we doing? What is the message that we're trying to give across?
No, Ray Hartman,
Let me ask guy, what's the limit on arrest? If guy goes on a crime spree, do you stop it at 5 or do you stop it at 2?
I mean, reported as 1.
Let me,
and you don't arrest him.
Okay. One show a week, we're about to get thrown off the air. So David Barklage with a minute left, who won the week?
One, I'm going to say Ray Hartman because his integrity has never wavered as a journalist, and 2, Dr. Harley Rutledge, who was an early pioneer and distinguished professor at Southeast Missouri State, who studied the UFO phenomenon scientifically. And after the congressional hearing that the Soviets had 43 different interactions and actually lost men and high-ranking American officials coming forward, I believe it will be a matter of time to Dr. Rutledge, to his family, will be proven that he was on the right track.
Who won the week?
I'd say Jay Nixon won the week for being from Jefferson County, proud Jefferson County man, and finally seeing the light and leaving and supporting a different party than the Democrats.
Who won the week?
You know who I'm going with? I'm going with my amazing leader, Crystal Quaid. She won. She is going to win this race.
I like the prediction.
And that's right. And that's who I chose to win for this week.
We were talking for the show. I would have liked Crystal Quaid, but I will say I'm going to go with Don Chapman, who's not exactly in the news, a little bit, but her as a symbol of the amazing people who have fought on behalf of something I think we can all agree on, one of really the worst environmental tragedy in our history, Coldwater Creek. And it's thanks to, Crystal, Josh Hawley, by the way, and others across the line, there's been real bipartisan engagement. And I'm going to sort of symbolically give it to Don.
She's changed some things. She's been a change agent.
John's been great, and a lot of others. I mean, she's not the only one, but Don's been terrific.
I'm going to say Joy Thurston. Queen of Bonne Terre, absolute delight, lived a wonderful life, passed away this week. Hope you'll join us next week here on This Week in Missouri Politics.
This Week in Missouri Politics is sponsored by the Missouri Automobile Dealers Association, Ameren, Spire, and the United Electric Cooperative.